Hi, I'm Roxanne Richardson, and this is the Casual Friday podcast. In this week's podcast, I have tidbits. I have an update on my various spinning projects, and I want to talk about knitting for spring and summer, both the types of yarns and fibers that are available, as well as the particular projects that I'm working on. So let's get started. I have a tidbit to share from, I believe it's Shayna, might be Shanna, there's only one N, but I think it's Shayna, who sent me a link to a YouTube video. She says, "Hi Roxanne, PBS is running a series for Earth Month, and this one featured a Swiss Shepherd." It's a video that's featured a Swiss Shepherd. "It's interesting to learn how climate change is impacting the Alps in both positive and negative ways. Thought your viewers might enjoy this as much as I did." It is really interesting. It's a 10-minute video, and it follows a shepherd and his apprentice in the Alps as they are moving their sheep to pasture and the struggles that they are having with climate change, but also the impact it's having on some animals in a positive way. So it is really interesting, and I will leave a link down in the show notes if you are interested in watching this as well. This tidbit is a video that came up in my feed the other day. It's called Fuzzy Science, The History of Wool Science in Yorkshire. And it is a presentation lecture given by a woman. She's an American woman who's at the University of Leeds in Yorkshire in England. She's working on her PhD on wool science, and she talks a little bit about the challenges. She's got 2 master's degree in like history and something that's related to history, and where she was studying specific written works. And this is a situation where she is researching a whole field, and there's just so much information, and she's trying to, figure out how to pare it down. So at the time of the recording, she was still like a year and a half away from writing her dissertation. But she talks about sort of the history of a little bit about sheep domestication, or when humans started using wool, and how many thousands of years ago it was, and how we had domesticated sheep to have the qualities of having wool that doesn't shed, unlike the ancestors of sheep, these hair sheep that would shed in the spring. How much we knew and had learned about the qualities of wool over those millennia, and that wool didn't enter into the scientific field until sometime in the 19th century, when there was a microscopist, a guy who uses microscopes to look at them, look at wool under the microscope, and actually begin to define terms. And she talks a bit about, like, there's 4 areas that are interested or that use wool. So there's the shepherds themselves and, agriculture. There are the people who produce, the textiles. There are scientists, and there's, I think, one other field. So there's these different fields, and they all have their own vocabularies, and they don't necessarily communicate what they know to those other fields. And she's talking about how that, cross communication started to happen, and how it's happening now, and so in the literature that she's going through to figure out sort of timelines of things. So it's a work in progress. She's basically explaining her work in progress, her PhD in progress, and the kinds of things that she's investigating. So I thought it was an interesting, I think it was 45 minutes she spoke, and maybe it was an hour altogether because people had questions. So if you're interested, I will leave a link to that down in the show notes. The other day, I was watching a video that came up in my YouTube feed. I don't remember the name of the person. If I can figure it out, I will put it on the screen and link to it down in the show notes. It was a 28-minute video, I think, about interchangeable needles, and she bought 5 different sets. Some were luxury sets, and some were like really cheap sets, to compare them and see if one type is better than the other. She paid for them all herself, and then she knitted up swatches with them, and to see how they worked, and and what she thought of them and what like the differences were, what was unique about one set versus another. One of the things that she said that I was slightly amused at, because I've been knitting now for 40 years, so I don't like to think that like the patterns and the tools that I was using when I first learned to knit are now vintage, but apparently they are. But she was talking about a particular inexpensive set and saying, this is what I think of as interchangeable sets from 20 years ago. And I looked at it and I thought, huh, that is not what I would think of as an interchangeable set from 20 years ago. She was talking about, in her review, she was talking about Knit Picks interchangeables. And I bought Knit Picks interchangeables 20 years ago. That was not my first set of interchangeable needles, but they were the first set that solved some problems that I had with certain fixed circular needles, namely Addy. There were things I liked about Addy. They called them Addy turbos. I didn't like how blunt the tips were. I didn't like how I had to buy, a different needle every time I was, buying something, or knitting something different, and I might have the right tip size but the wrong cable size, or the right cable size, the wrong tip size. And someone in a knitting group suggested that I get an interchangeable set from Knit Picks. I ordered it. The very first thing I wanted to knit was a 16-inch hat, which I could not make a 16-inch needle. I wanted to make it a hat, probably 20 inches, and I needed a 16-inch needle, which I could not make with that set, because the tips were all 5 inches in length and the cable has to be at least as long as the tips in total in order to actually make something that is not even round but a teardrop shape. So to make a 16-inch needle, you'd need 4-inch tips. And so that was a really frustrating thing to me. I bought this new set and then I couldn't make this needle, and then somebody said, well, why don't you just use Magic Loop? I'm like, what's Magic Loop? And once I learned that, I'm like, I did not need an interchangeable set. And to this day, I mostly knit, even if I'm using interchangeable needle, I will use a 32-inch circular needle regardless. But that comment about what circular needle, interchangeable needles were like 20 years ago made me think about the interchangeable set I had bought when I first moved here to the Twin Cities in, I think it was 1988. So it was just a couple of years after I'd learned to knit. And one of the things was always I'd get to the yarn shop and I'd find a pattern and they would tell me what needles I needed, and I didn't remember what needle sizes I had at home. And so I didn't have a car. I'd have to take the bus to the yarn shop. So then I had to decide between, do I go ahead and buy another set of needles? And then when I get home, find out I already have those? Or do I not buy them, thinking maybe I did have them at home, and then not have them at home and not be able to start my project because I'd have to take the bus back to the yarn shop to get the needles. So that was a frustrating thing to me. And I saw on display there a set of interchangeable needles. They were called Denise interchangeable needles. And I thought, this is the perfect solution. I will never have to buy another knitting needle. What I didn't realize was that my knitting style at the time made it really frustrating to work with circular needles because I typically was knitting sweaters flat and I was using long straight needles, 14-inch needles, and I would anchor the right hand needle against the junction of my hip and thigh so that it was there. I wasn't having to hold on to it. And I had an English style where I would touch the needle, but I didn't have to hold on to it. And this style it's called supported knitting. Some people call themselves pit knitters because they anchor it under here. If you have a knitting belt, it would be supported. So the angle that your needle is at is going to vary depending on your style and just your personal idiosyncrasies within that style. And what I realized was I couldn't do my anchoring because the tip was this long and I had to put it at the junction and it was not comfortable. And the needle tips were plastic, and then they had these kind of thick tubes that connected the two tips. And so I never ended up using them. And then when I started the Master Hand Knitting program, and I was in these online forums, this is before Ravelry, before any other social media, but we had these online forums, and we were talking about interchangeable needles, and I said how I had this, I think somebody brought up the Denise needles. I'm like, oh yeah, I have a set of those. I hate them. But somebody else really loved them, and she was collecting sets. And I just sent her my set because I'm never going to use it. And she was like, yay. So she got another set. So she was happy. I was happy. So it wasn't until I started wanting to knit in the round more, like I wanted to knit hats, I wanted to knit socks, things like that, that required knitting in the round. And double pointed needles were just as problematic as circular needles, because even more problematic because they had to jam them, a pointy end into my thigh, and it just, my hands were not in the position that I was comfortable knitting. So I started learning continental just so that when I knit stockinette in the round, I could do that on double pointed needles. And then I started learning magic loop, and I started using that more when my kids were in sports, and because I would be in a swimming pool stadium or ice rink, and I would drop a double point and I would bounce down the bleachers. And so it was sort of a self-defense thing. If I used magic loop, I wouldn't drop a needle and lose it. So I started using that more. And then over time, I gradually started using continental more and more. And I rarely use the straight needles. I still do when I use my English style, which is occasionally. And it always feels very comfortable. And I really like it. It's just not as good for things like seed stitch and ribbing as the way that I do continental knitting. Not every continental style makes ribbing and seed stitch easy, but some do. I was just interested after watching that video about what the history of the interchangeable needles actually were, like when had they been invented. And so I was Googling around, and I found on the Denise Interchangeable Needle website, they're still selling products. They had a page with a story that was written by somebody who had interviewed the woman who had invented them. She invented them in the 1950s for herself. She was wanting to knit a baby blanket, but her straight needles weren't long enough, and she would either have to knit it in strips, then sew it together, which would take, she felt would take even longer than the knitting would. And so she kind of figured out how to cut a needle in half, and she had her husband help her attach this tube, and she made herself a long circular needle and then knit the blanket in 2 days and was able to give the blanket away. People started seeing her use these and wondering about it, and so she invented these circular interchangeable needles and got a patent on it, which I will leave a link to down below. Her husband said, you know, if you actually get this patented, then I will have to quit my job in order to do the help with the manufacturing, because she was coming up with all the ideas about what she wanted, and he had experience with these particular materials or tools or whatever. And so she got it patented. He quit his job, and they started manufacturing these Denise interchangeable needles. And I think they might have been made from different materials at first, but certainly when I bought them, and I think even now, they are made from plastic. But I thought it was a really interesting story about, you know, the initial interchangeable needles, because especially when you think about in the 1950s, circular needles did exist, but they weren't very popular. They had been invented in the 1920s, but they weren't that great. And so she may not have been exposed to them, or she may have wanted things where she could just switch her tips around and use that same cable. I don't know. She's not alive anymore to ask. I thought it was really interesting how long ago she came up with that idea, and how long it took circular needles just to really become popular. I think the struggle that I had 20 years ago with circular needles were that the Addy had a decent cable, but so many of them came in a package, you know, a little package. So you have the two tips pointing up, and then the cord would be circle like this. And so you know, to make it fit in the package, and you take it out and it would just remember that. So it's called memory, like it just remembered that it had that shape. And to get it to forget that shape, you had to run it like with steam or in hot water, make sure it wasn't too hot or that you didn't leave it in too long to kind of relax it. But a lot of times it was just too stiff, and magic loop is really difficult with those stiff cables because you'd get ladders down the side. And so the thing that was nice about Addies was they had this flexible cable, but the thing I hated about Addies was they had this blunt tip. It took several years for them to come up with rockets and their lace needles. The lace needles were pointier, and then the lace needles were like brass coated nickel, and then the rockets were just nickel, like the Turos, except they had the same kind of pointy tip that the lace ones had. But by that time, the Knit Picks interchangeables had been out, and in my mind, the Knit Picks were created to compete with Addi in terms of they were nickel, just like the Addies were. None of them are nickel now, I don't think. They've switched to stainless steel. But it solved that problem of the short blunt tip, and then they were interchangeable. And the cables were decent back then. You know, over time they've kind of changed things. They've added all different kinds of tips like laminated wood and whatever. I don't even think the ones that I originally bought 20 years ago, I don't think you could buy that exact set anymore. I think it has a different name now. But it wasn't until then that you started to get more and more circular needles, interchangeable or not, that had decent cables on them. So magic loop, like I said, was really difficult to do with those old stiff cables, but a lot of people used the two circulars method then instead. And so it didn't matter how stiff those cables were. And I think people still use the two circulars method, but I feel like it's less common now for a couple of reasons. One is you only need one needle with magic loop, and you have that flexible cable that solves that problem. And the second one is that they have so many kinds of interchangeable needles now and different lengths. You can get 4-inch tips that allow you to do a 16-inch circular needle or longer needle with those same 4-inch tips, which I don't like a 4-inch tip. I need a longer, just my knitting style, I need a longer tip, a 5-inch tip. And some people, they even have the little shorties too, that like you can do a 9-inch circular. And those tips, way too small for me, hurt my hands. I personally would much rather use a 32-inch circular needle for as many things as I could. So I don't have to switch the cables around. I don't have to find a different set of tips. I just have, you know, my size 8 needle, and I can use it any place I need a size 8. That's me. I like to minimize the tools in that way. It was interesting to see her compare these interchangeable needle sets and to see what her perspective was on what things were like 20 years ago. Which then led me to, I wonder when they first came out, and to realize that I had one of those Denise interchangeable sets that was created by the woman, you know, who invented the whole idea and had it patented. So I'll leave some links down below to that story as well as to her patent down in the show notes. I have a couple of things to share about spinning. I've actually been doing quite a bit of spinning in the past couple of weeks. I tend to go in spurts where I have a spinning project and I will work on it, and then I get done with that one. And usually I move on to the knitting project associated with it, and I'm not even thinking about spinning at that point. But it's spring right now, which means that I'm heading towards summer. I don't stop knitting, but a lot of times what I knit shifts to lighter weight things, socks in particular, or I start doing more of other things like sewing and spinning. I always, not always, in the past few years, I participate in Tour de Fleece, which is not competition, it's a spinning challenge period that occurs at the same time as Tour de France. So when the cyclists are cycling, spinners are spinning. When the cyclists are resting, the spinners are resting. And there are people who do teams, and they have, maybe their goal is working with raw fleece, or their goal is spinning a certain type of thing, spinning down their stash. They might have goals, and sometimes whoever's organizing those groups might give out a prize at the end in some way. I tend not to join the teams. I did the first year, and then I was like, I just don't want to go and report what I did. I want to work on what I'm working on, and I don't care what other people are doing. I mean, it's interesting. I'm glad for them, but it's like, I'm not, oh, I got to go look and see what everyone else is doing. It's like, this is the time period where I'm focused on me. So I'm starting to think about Tour de Fleece already, and what I am going to do during that month. It's going to be July 4th to the 20 something. I think it's 21 days, but it's within a 23-day period, so it's probably ends on the 27th. So I've been thinking about what it is I want to do for Tour de Fleece while I'm working on my other spinning projects. So let's go to the overhead, and you can see what I've been working on in my spinning life for the past couple of weeks. This is what will eventually be the sweater that I want to knit. That sweater is called Pixelated. I will put a picture of it on the cover. I didn't start out with that in mind when I began spinning for this. What happened was I was visiting Trish from Fiber Love Diary last September, and we were in her dye studio, and she said, oh, you want to dye some? Well, I said, I'd love to. And so I picked out some Falkland top, I think 8 ounces of it. And she helped me with the colors. I knew kind of the color that I wanted to end up with, like the color tone. So she helped me with that and pick those colors out and kind of led me through the process. And then I spun it up, and I ended up with this yarn, which I love. And I wanted to, it's 8 ounces. So I'm like, what am I going to use with 8 ounces where I could really use it all? And I thought, I really like to knit this into a sweater in some way, but I need to have some other colors. And how am I going to do that? Do I try to find a commercial yarn that's going to be similar to this in terms of weight and the way that it knits? Or should I try dyeing something? And if I dye something, what colors do I do? That took a couple of months to figure out. And during that time, I experimented with something called wool tincture dyes. It's a very simple way of dyeing where the dye is pre-measured, like in a tea bag. It really makes the dyeing process simple. And I just wanted to try it out, see what it was like. And I got their starter set, and it came with, like, I think 10 colors, and they were all in pairs. So if you wanted to dye things that coordinated, you could. And I had some bear sock yarn, so I dyed these two, which are these coordinating colors. And I thought this would go really well with that. Of course, these isn't the right quantity or the right yarn weight. So I bought more of the dye, and I dyed some more top. And you can see that there's some variation in different parts of the top. And so then this will all get blended together in a 3-ply yarn. It probably won't be quite as variegated as this is, because I was going for something that was more solid. And in this, I actually used 3 different colors. I'm going to start plying this weekend, but the spinning went way faster than I thought it would. Every time that I get ready to start spinning, it kind of takes me a while to get into it. And so I thought, well, if I do 10 grams a day, every day, then in 6 weeks I'll be done. And I was done in less than 2 weeks with this part of it. And so now I have to ply it. So somebody's probably going to ask, why is there red on here? And this was when I was spinning this, every time I was done with my, whatever it was, 67 grams of singles, I just wound it onto a storage bobbin. When I was spinning this, I thought, I'm going to keep going. And so I had my 67 grams, and then I spun some red, and then I knit the next 67 grams so that when I wound it off, I could tell where the dividing part is. So I'll tear this up at some point. This one came from me winding all these off onto storage bobbins and thinking these seem like they don't have quite as much maybe as these. And then I saw there was 6 grams of tops lying under the table where I'd done all the dividing up. So I just spun that up into the little bit extra there. But this I will start plying this weekend. I'm really excited about it. And I really hope the colors actually do work together once I start knitting. We shall see. Hopefully, fingers crossed, this will all work. So I have started working on my next spinning project just to kind of prepare for it. Here is the Romney in all its different stages. So this is the raw wool. And so this still has the lanolin in it, but you can see just how beautiful this wool looked right off the sheep. It's just beautiful and clean, and I just couldn't resist it. So I bought 8 ounces of this, and I scoured it up, and it can get, really fluffy, and so you don't see the crimp in this quite the same way. You can see it's kind of spread out here. Here's a washed lock though that still looks very much like the unscoured one. So there's plenty of crimp. And I had done some sampling early on after I'd done the scouring. I combed a little bit of it and did some sampling. And I did a 2-ply and a 3-ply. And I did not, this is underplied 2-ply. So it's kind of loose and big. It would need to be run through my spinning wheel again just to kind of tighten up the ply. But I don't typically like a 2-ply. I like a 3-ply. It's what I prefer using. And it came out nice and smooth and feels really nice. And so I thought this is what I absolutely want to do. And I do want to comb it. So combing is something that I have never liked. I just find it very annoying and slow. But when I was at the retreat, Deb Robeson did a demonstration that made all the difference. So this is what my combs look like. You get 2 of these. And these are Valkyrie mini combs. And you see that there's this hole in here. So there's a little stand, wooden stand with a peg that this gets threaded onto, and then you clamp that to a table. And so because of the orientation of this peg, these are meant to be vertical like this. So it's coming up from the table. And then with the second one, you come at a 90-degree angle. What you do is you load up to the card, you open this up a little bit. You put this onto the combs like this, and you load it up so it's like 1/3 to a halfway loaded up, and then you take the other comb and you come across the tips to kind of open them up, and you gradually are combing and combing until everything or most of it has been transferred to the other comb. But if this is going this way, then the other comb has come horizontally like this. And I just found that really uncomfortable. But at the retreat, there was a set of combs that were mounted this way so that they were horizontal. And so then you could take your comb and bring it down instead. And I found that so much easier. And I really liked that one. And I thought, well, maybe I'm just didn't know all the other little tips and tricks that Deb was showing during the combing process. And now that I know those little tips and tricks, maybe I could try the other combs that were set up there that were like mine at home, which were set up like this. I tried it and I hated it. So my goal was to figure out a way to have my Valkyrie combs mounted horizontally. And I did find a way to do that. I got a little stand from Paradise Fibers, and it allows me to just stick this in and tighten it down and keep it there. And I'll put a little picture in so you can see what the setup is like. But that has made me really like combing. So I was ready to go through this scoured Romney and comb a bunch of it. And I've done most of it so far. So this is what you get out of one. Like I filled up the combs maybe halfway, and then I combed it back and forth, and then I pulled it off. gradually. And so you get all of this. This is combed top. So this is the end I want to spin from, because this is the end where the tips were. So the wool will go in that direction. So this is hand combed top, hand combed top, and it's really nice to spin with. But and I've always known that it was really nice to spin with. I just hated the prep work, but now I don't mind it. So I'm looking forward to spinning this. So it's kind of enjoyable to do the combing. So this is something where this is that tip end, and then I just take it and kind of stick it in the middle here. There's a little nest, and so then when I go to spin it, I can just pull that out and start spinning with it. So I'm really excited, and this is the sample yarn that I did a few weeks ago with some to determine that I did want to do it combed. I did want a 3-ply, and so I could see what the actual resulting yarn was like, and I really like it. I will probably dye it, because as much as I love natural colors, I actually like real color next to my skin or something. You know, this color would probably look good on a lot of people. It would not look good next to my face, for example. But if it were dyed, it would really create some depth to the color to have this natural color as the base. So I'll have to figure out what I'm going, once I see how much yardage I have, figure out what I'm going to knit and who I'm going to knit it for, and then pick out the color. So if I knit something for somebody else, I will consult them on the color, just like I would for any project I was going to knit for someone, but particularly for something that's going to be hand spun. It's got to be something that they're really going to like, because I'm not going to invest this much time and energy into it and then make something that they don't even really end up liking. I got 2 different yarns for summer tops at Yarn Tales 1. The first was this Elsebeth Lavold Hempathy, and the second one is this Barocco Tilly. So I want to talk for a while about the fiber content, the yarn construction, and also a fiber that each one of them has that may not be obvious to you, what it certainly wasn't to me, what that fiber actually is. So let's start with the Hempathy. So this yarn is 41% cotton, 34% hemp, and 25% Modal. And you probably can't see there's an R here for registered trademark. And I was pretty certain I knew that that was some kind of rayon. And it was just a trademark for some kind of rayon. So I really like a linen once it's been knit and washed and worn a few times. It's very soft, but I hate knitting with it. It's really hard in my hands. I had never knit with hemp before. I'd certainly knit with cotton before. So I thought, well, this is an interesting blend. And it's much easier on my hands, I think, than certainly than linen, or even 100% cotton can be pretty hard on my hands sometimes. There's just no elasticity in plant fibers, so there's no give, and so it's just harder on your hands. So this one has got Modal in it, and this one is called Barocco Tilly, and this one says 62% Pima cotton, 38% Cupro. And I did not know what Cupro was. So when I got home, I looked it up. Cupro is a type of rayon, and so is Modal. So rayon was the first, it's considered a semi-synthetic yarn, and it was the first of any kind of synthetic yarn that was ever developed, and it was in the late 19th century, like 1882, something like that. And it's a process that will use different chemicals to break down cellulose, which is in plant fibers, and then you can take the resulting goo and turn it into a filament. And in the early years, they were calling it art silk, meaning artificial silk. The process that was originally used isn't used anymore. Rayon or viscose is an umbrella term for different processes that all create these semi-synthetic yarns from cellulose fiber. So it's the type of chemical process and also how it's manufactured that determines what name it has. So cupro is short for cuproammonium. According to Wikipedia, there's only one company still making rayon through this process in Japan. And the thing that's supposed to be so great about this particular one, and this was one that was developed in about 1890, is that it makes a very silky resulting yarn, which is why they were calling it artificial silk. It was very much like silk. Modal is a trademark for a way of creating viscose or rayon that is stronger when it's wet, because like the standard process creates something that isn't that strong. It gets weaker when it's wet, and Modal is stronger when it's wet than the other version. So, but it is a trademark name, although it's gotten almost genericized because it's used so much. So that's the difference in those two fiber components. It's not just the percentages of like cotton and hemp, but also what type of rayon is used in these. And I'll leave links to some information that I, was doing, because like I said, I'd never heard of cupro, didn't have any idea what that meant when I bought it. But now I want to look at how these yarns are constructed, because they're constructed in very different ways. So if we look at the Hempathy, it's plied. It's a plied yarn, and you can tell by looking at it, the angle of the ply is toward the left, and they call that an S ply. And the middle part of an S angles in this direction, so they call that an S ply. You can see that really well in my hand spun yarn. You can see that angle of the ply. This looks like a 2-ply yarn, and it kind of behaves very much like that, but it's not a 2-ply. You can see that there's these two strands that are being twisted in that direction together, but each of these strands is made up of 4 really tiny strands. So these are what are called the singles. If you look at the singles of my hand spun, you might be able to see how the twist is in this direction. When I made the singles, it was going in that direction. That is called a Z twist because it's like the middle part of a Z. So the singles have a Z twist, and then when they are plied together, you twist them in the opposite direction, in the S direction. So these little singles are twisted in the Z direction, and then they are plied together in the S direction. So then they took these two separate strands that are each plied in the S direction, and then they twisted them together again in the S direction. So this is called an S on S plied yarn. And this is a really unusual construction it's unusual to me. I don't think I've ever seen one that was constructed in this particular way. Usually what I see is like a merino yarn that's super round and almost has like a core in it. It's just super round. And those are made up of 2 plies, like a whole bunch of strands that are 2-ply. And then the whole bunch of those strands are then plied together again in the S direction, where this one took all of the like 4 strands, plied them together, and then just took 2 of those and plied those together, where the wool that I'm used to seeing is usually 2 strands plied together and a bunch of the 2-ply strands plied together into a multi-strand. So one of the results of a S on S plied yarn is that you can get a result where the fabric has, it looks like one of the legs is more vertical and then the other one is angled out. And that is a result of being an S on S plied yarn. When you have Z-spun singles that are plied in the S direction, then you get that balanced look of a stitch that has a V, like this right here. These are more balanced stitches because it's a regular S-plied yarn. To my eye, yes, there's that vertical line, but maybe it isn't as pronounced as it might be in one of those other multi-strand yarns that are rounder. This is certainly round. It's just different than I've seen before, and I thought that was really interesting. Now with the Tilly, this yarn, it not only feels very different from the Hempathy. There's no hemp in it. It's cotton and then this cupro rayon. It's variegated, but the stitches are very much, V shape. This is what's called a chainette yarn. So if you look at it, it looks kind of like an I-cord in a way, or something that was kind of crocheted together. You see how it looks like a little I-cord? It's all chained together. So you get something like this, and it's got stretch to it. It's got a lot more stretch. So you can take something like a cotton and this rayon, which have a lot of drape to it, and maybe not a lot of elasticity, and you form it, you construct it with a chain ply, and then it's got more stretch to it, more elasticity. So I knit this swatch a while back, and it was very easy to knit with. There was no trouble. I was practicing this little stitch pattern to see if it was going to work out with this variegated yarn. I think it'll work out. I'm planning on knitting this cardigan. I'll put it on the screen because I don't think this is going to show up too well. It's this cardigan right here. It's a Barocco pattern, and this yarn I'm using is a Barocco yarn, but the yarn that was originally called for this is discontinued, and then the replacement one has also been discontinued. So, I was trying out that little design at the beginning to see how that was going to work out. I think on a large scale, it will probably work out okay. I just want something to throw on if I'm in air conditioning in the summer. So that's my future plan for this particular yarn, but it might be a little bit before I start working on it. So now that you've seen the two yarns that I picked up at Yarn Tales, I want to talk about the top that I'm working on right now using the Hempathy yarn from Elsebeth Lavold. It's called the Kaylee top. It is a pattern. It is available on Ravelry. I got it as part of the purchase of the yarn, the Hempathy yarn, because KFI distributes both the yarn and the pattern. So I got that as part of buying the yarn. It was interesting to me for a couple of reasons. I just like the idea of, oh, pretty soon I don't have to wear long sleeve wool sweaters. And I like the idea of a summer top, even if they end up being warmer for me than I might like when it's super hot. But I love the yarn color, and I love the stitch patterns that are in this top. I really love having to pay attention to my knitting, and it keeps me engaged. Like, what am I doing now? Stockinette, it's very easy to do without looking, like if you're busy watching a movie or you're at a knitting group or whatever. But when I'm at home, I like having something to focus on, and really pay attention to. And that's what this top is doing for me. So let's go to the overhead, and I can show you a little bit more up close what this top is like. One of the things that really appealed to me about this was that there were multiple stitch patterns in here. I really, just like with cables, I like having panels of different cable types. It just keeps me interested. The part that was hardest for me in terms of just doing it was this bottom, which is a lot of stockinette, really boring. So when you get up to this part right here and you're splitting, so you, first of all, you have half as many stitches, but then you have this interesting stitch pattern. So the center is like a cable lace pattern. These are 2x1 cables, so you have 2 stitches crossing over one stitch, either that way or this way, and then there's some lace on the inside. These are little mock cables where you have 3 stitches, you slip one, and then you knit these 2, and then you pass that one over, so that you only have 2 stitches. And then on the wrong side row, when you get to these 2 stitches, you do a purl, a yarn over, a purl, so then you're back to 3. And that's what gives you the little hole. And then you just work you work 2 rows of just knitting them or purling them, and then you repeat that. So it's a pretty little mock cable, a 3-stitch mock cable. And then here we've got these mirrored panels of these lace diamonds. Now what's tricky about these is that once you get up to this point, so you're going to be working the top, you are doing patterning on the right side and the wrong side. And that's the part where I would forget. I just get in the zone of working wrong side row all the way across, and I'd completely forget. And then as I was working across the right side row, go oops, and I'd have to drop down those few stitches and then re-knit them, and before I could do the current row. Or I would know I was supposed to do it on the wrong side, and I would get it slightly messed up because I couldn't really see what I was doing. So that was a challenge, but it was an interesting challenge, kept me on my toes. Then you have this little squiggly thing here, which is either a decrease and a yarn over, or yarn over and a decrease, to create this little snaky thing with the eyelets on either side. Then here's where the sizing comes in. So the small size would have one of these panels. I'm doing the medium size, so it's got 2, and then the larger size has 3. And these are pretty large jumps from one size to another. Like the smallest one is 35¼ inches, and the medium is 41¼ inches. And at first I thought, oh, well, I'll just scale it so that it's somewhere in between those, so it's not quite as oversized on me. But you really can't. It's like you've got to do these panels or not do them. With a stockinette sweater, it'd be very easy to do that, but not with this. Then you have this edging here, and these are mirrored as well. You have your left edge and your right edge. And the challenging thing about this is that in order for this to kind of go out and in, this hasn't been blocked so that you can see those points. The way it does that is by decreasing. So you have more decreases than yarn overs, and then you have more yarn overs than decreases. It's not something that I found easy to just memorize. So I'd have to keep looking at the charts. So this pattern comes with, you could do everything from the written instructions, which I find lace, that's like the worst scenario for me, is to try to knit lace from written instructions, but there are charts. But the charts are all a little separate. And so I find it much easier for me to put it all in one big chart. So I use a program called Stitch Mastery, so then I can lay everything out and I can know what to do at any given point in any given row. Now this is how I had originally charted it out, because the instructions had a little problem in the shoulder shaping neck area. The original instructions said, where to place the first short row turn on each side, and then it said how to place the second one, like you were supposed to bind off these stitches and then do your second one 4 stitches before the first, and join a ball of yarn, so you're doing it in each direction, and then you have some more bind offs as you're working these separately. But once it got done with the neck shaping, it just said to work across all of the stitches. Well, that would only give you like a few short rows, and that didn't seem right to me. And so I wrote to the designer, and she referred me to KFI, which is Knitting Fever I don't know if it's International Incorporated, I don't know what the I stands for. They're the ones who distribute the Hempathy yarn, and this pattern was designed with Hempathy in mind. And so she had designed the smallest size and knit the sample and wrote the instructions for that, and it was up to them to tech edit it so that it would be for the other sizes and modify the instructions. And so I wrote to them and said, I think, you know, you're missing a repeat somewhere. And my assumption was that this was just supposed to keep going after this bind off. I looked at the schematic and I thought, I knew that the shoulders were 2 inches deep, you know, from here to here. And I thought the neck was too. And I just thought that's how it was. So the errata came out, I think it was 9 days later. And this is supposed to be repeated, and then the neck doesn't happen until up here, which is, so I had to redo this chart so that I kept working all of the stitch patterning until I got up to here. And then as I actually started reading it, I realized they were saying every size was supposed to do 4 stitches prior to the previous short row turn, even though all of the sizes had the same shoulder slope depth. And I realized if you have more stitches for a medium, these have to be spaced further apart, and for a large, even further apart. For the medium, it was like 5 stitches, not 4. And it was just, you know, a little bit of a mind bender, realizing that stitch counts were changing from row to row in these 2 patterns. But once you actually start short rowing, you just stop working the patterning. You just work it in stockinette. So however many stitches you have is however many stitches you have. It was really helpful to me to have this chart visual and then compare it to what I have on the needles, and then be able to see, wait, this isn't going to work. And to try to understand that. So I am going to send another email to KFI and say, you need to adjust the short row turns for the other sizes. But it is a really interesting top, and I'm glad that I'm knitting it, and I'm looking forward to wearing it. I should be able to wear it sometime in an upcoming Casual Friday. So that's what I am currently working on. Well, that's it for this week's Casual Friday. If you have any comments or questions about today's video or suggestions for videos you'd like to see in the future, you can leave those down in the comments below, or join the discussion in my Ravelry group, Rocks. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.